Hello, everyone. Welcome to Console Room 24, Year 11. This is the How to Be a Virtual Panelist panel. And joining me today here is Gordon Dymowski. You want to introduce yourself?
Well, my name is Gordon Dymowski. I am the uh, lead organizer for the Chicago Doctor Who meetup, and I am also a professional writer. I do both paid professional work and I also write fiction and nonfiction essays.
And I'm Michael Zecca. I've been a frequent panelist at Console Room over the 11 years. You probably saw me a lot when we were live in person years ago. I've been virtual the last few years. I'm also part of the convention social media team now, so you'll see me managing a lot of things on the Discord during the virtual convention this weekend. So feel free to reach out to me if you have questions. And that being said, let's talk a little bit about how to become a panelist on one of these virtual panels and the things to keep in mind while you're a virtual panelist. Gordon, where do we want to start?
Why don't we talk a little bit about like you mentioned you were a frequent panelist.
Yes.
I've been a panelist and I've ran panels for Console Room, Chicago TARDIS, C2E2, and the Meetup. So, and I've also done both in-person and virtual. And I think for Console Rooms, something to remember is there is, if you're on site, there's probably a how to be a panelist panel. So we may cover some things that they're covering, but with virtual panels, there's some different dynamics. Like for example, as you can tell, Michael and I are not in the same room. I mean, we're not even in the same TARDIS. So,
Yeah.
I know, mind blown, but it's also some of the basic principles still kind of they're still prevalent.
Oh, absolutely. And I will just give my background. I've been doing panels for 15 years or so. I started doing a few at Convergence, which is a large convention here in the Twin Cities some years ago. So I have spoken to a room of 500 or more people before. Prior to that, I was a high school teacher for a while and did do some presentations at science teacher conferences, both at the local, state, and national level. So I do have some public speaking experience that way, but like many science fiction fans, I've also got social anxiety and I do get some stage fright.
Hmm.
And I will tell you that one of the nice things about virtual panels is you don't have that crowd staring you in the face. It's a lot more comfortable if you've been thinking about contributing to panels, but nervous about how you might react on a stage or in front of a group. First of all, Console Room's a great place to start because it's a small convention. You tend to know most of the people there pretty quickly. And a lot of the panel rooms are very small. But in these virtual panels, it's even smaller. You're going to feel like you're just talking to a small group of friends,
Hmm.
even though there may be dozens of people watching you at the time that the panel is airing.
Yep. And you never get the one person who stands up and says, this is more of a statement than a question.
Yes.
It never happens in a virtual
Although
panel.
that can come in the YouTube chat if you're doing a live virtual panel, but you can control it better there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, sure. That being said, it's always good to be respectful to questions or statements that come up. When
Hmm.
those uncomfortable ones come up, a good moderator will know how to work around it. And I have had some experience moderating panels now over the years, so I've had to learn some of those tricks. Good news if you're a new panelist, you probably don't need to be a moderator. You could just be a voice on that panel, let a more experienced panelist deal with those situations.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's not about you showing off. It's not about you're not sitting in front of a group of people and showing off your vast knowledge. It's about the conversation. So like when I've moderated panels, if I'm doing most of the talking, I'm not, I'm getting it completely wrong. It's having when you have people with their own perspectives and people who are willing to follow the conversation rather than just say, here I am, look at me. That's when the better panels come out. And it's one of the reasons I like virtual panels is that it's a little at a convention, you've got noise, you've got distractions, but here it's a lot easier to get into the conversation because it's not in public. It's just, it's basically a Zoom meeting between friends that just
Sure.
happens to be
Sure.
recorded.
And it certainly is a concern people have raised about panels in general at science fiction conventions over the years is that sometimes one or two male voices dominate the conversation. And a good moderator for a panel will make sure that all the panelists are given their opportunity to contribute, that one person isn't dominating the conversation. Um, and it's very easy, even yourself, to fall into doing a lot of talking. But yeah, we really want to give everyone a chance to contribute. Also, I really want to say along the line of it being a conversation, having a variety of viewpoints. When we did the Power of the Doctor panel for Who Yourself Live last year, I specifically wanted half of the panelists to be fans that came in the newer era of the series, because they have a very different perspective looking at that special versus those of us that have been watching since the 80s. And I wanted to hear what they had to say.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that when I'm putting together a panel, if it's not like a Chicago TARDIS or a council room where you volunteer, 2019, I put together a Doctor Who panel for C2E2 called Sorting Fair Play. And you can find it on YouTube, just C2E2 Sorting Fair Play panel. And when in looking at putting the panel together, I mean, I had the one or two white dudes over 40 saying, "Hey, I want to be on your panel." And I knew that wasn't going to work. So
Yeah.
I was very deliberate in who I selected. And the four other panelists were um, Mishi Chorda, who's a 5-time Hugo Award winning editor, Dawn Ziana Moon, who is the director of Rocks Geek, um, Dana Armario Cop, who I knew through, she actually ran the meetup long before I did. And then there's Crystal, who I met through Chicago TARDIS, and I'm blanking on her last name. Sorry, Crystal. But I looked at one was I wanted to have an all-female panel because Jodie Whittaker, Jodie Whittaker, she's a woman. Having white dudes over 40 talk about the impact of Jodie Whittaker might not have the same effect. Part of it was um, different. They were also women of color. Um, Crystal is, I'm not sure the exact region, but she's Hispanic, Latinx. You've got uh, Dawn, who is from Singapore. Mishi is Filipino American, and Dinah is, I believe, is Lithuanian, half Lithuanian, I half. She's biracial, so I'm not sure. I again should have prepared for that, but I wanted that mix of people who had diverse perspective, but also diverse interest.
Yeah.
Mishi grew up. Her favorite doctor is John Pertwee. Um, Crystal and Dawn were from the more modern area, and Dinah was meetup organizer before I was. So instead of having everyone who agreed with me, there's a much richer conversation because it wasn't just people parroting what I told them to, or even fighting for uh, we weren't fighting over who had the right point. It
Mhm.
became about the conversation, and the
Yeah.
conversation is what's important in a panel.
And bringing in some unique viewpoints on any panel is a good thing, and not just speaking issues of gender or race. I have been on some panels at Convergence in the past where I was the odd one out.
Mm-hmm.
I think I joked about being the token male on either the Hunger Games or Orphan Black panel at one point. But more something about I was an ebook panel I was on in the early days of ebooks. And there was three authors sitting next to me, and I was there as a library employee, speaking about the library's perspective on ebooks compared to the author's perspective and the publisher's perspective we were hearing from the other panelists. And I think it was good to hear both sides of that for the average person in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And same goes for the kinds of panels we do at Console Room, whether it's about Doctor Who or about some other subject. Do you need to be an expert on the material? No, it depends on what you're talking about, obviously. I mean, Gordon and I have experience being virtual panelists, so it made sense for us to talk
Mm-hmm.
about this today. But and I've done, my wife have both done science panels at Console Room and brought our science backgrounds in. I started off in astrophysics, and I've done some astrophysics panels. Also moderated panels like that at Convergence, where I had actual NASA experts on the panel. Um, she's done various medical and biological panels and brought her expertise to play. But at the same time, I'm on a Star Trek panel at another time during the convention. I'm just a fan that's been watching that show since I was a toddler. So sometimes you're just bringing in the perspective you have. and then what experience you do have. And again, I love it when the new fans come in and give us their perspective on Doctor Who, because it can be very different from what us old fans see.
Yeah, especially since the show has changed so much. I mean,
Yeah,
it's 60 years old. There's a
yeah.
lot to cover.
Every production regime has brought in a new flavor to the show. That's what's given it longevity. So, if you didn't like, the Troughton era, John Pertwee comes along and it's very different, and
Hmm.
so on. It's been the same, even, within Stephen Moffat's run, the Matt Smith era is very different than Peter Capaldi's in some ways. It's similar in some ways because you have the same voice writing it, but there's very big differences. So, right. Um, okay. So, thought I'd mention a couple things that are an advantage of doing a virtual panel over a live panel. For those of you that have never done a panel before, thinking about jumping in, a lot of us have social anxiety. A lot of us have stage fright with virtual. You don't have a big crowd to face. You just get more comfortable with the conversation. Also, in this time of frankly continuing COVID, um,
Hmm.
and many of us have compromised health since having COVID. My system is immunocompromised. Uh, Several health issues that have been exacerbated by my COVID infection almost 4 years ago. Safer for me to be at home and maskless in my own home. If I was at the convention, I'd have a mask on, and anybody in the crowd that has a hearing impairment would not be able to speech read me.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, yeah. And virtual panels are also very accessible
yes,
because if you have mobility issues, you don't have to move around a convention floor.
yep,
Um, you also there are tools for um, like Zoom has an ability to in YouTube, you click on, you can get captions and you can
yes,
raise or lower the captions.
absolutely.
But it's also a way to make the convention available to people who either can't make it due to travel. Like I live in Chicago, and even I wouldn't fly out to Minnesota in the middle of January.
Yeah. And what we discovered when we did the 2021 convention completely virtually is we had a number of people in the UK who had never even considered coming to the United States, let alone Minnesota, for a convention, that joined us for the virtual convention. And some of them became excited about the idea of actually coming to Minnesota in January for this convention in some future date. So, yeah, it definitely opens doors. But I also think about, people with disabilities. Sci-fi fandom in this country has been around for a while, and a lot of the old guard of conventions are aging and having health problems and can't as easily get to conventions sometimes now. So we've got this option, which is great.
Yeah, and the other great advantage to doing virtual panels is um, there's very little barriers to entry because with an in-person panel, you have to travel to the site. You may have to find lodgings while you're at the convention, at the convention. You have to figure out food, with with virtual panels, all you really need is Zoom installed on a device. So it can be your iPhone, a tablet, a laptop. One thing I would definitely recommend if you decide to do virtual panel is to get a set of earphones and a decent micro. You don't need the headset with a microphone necessarily. You don't need necessarily the headset with the microphone, but having a nice microphone
Oh, yeah.
because that way, and this is a Logitech for like $20 off of Amazon.
Yeah.
So
This
it's not super expensive.
this is an Anchor headset that's like $28 on sale. And it's got a decent microphone built in. I was doing panels with just this headset before. I have since invested in a little condenser mic here just because I've done so many virtual panels the last few years, and it's on a swing arm because the computer actually creates a lot of vibration with its case fan through the table, which one of our recording engineers at Console Room noticed. So he suggested the swing arm, and it's helped a lot. But yeah, honestly, you can get by with an iPhone on
Hmm.
a tripod. Um, a lot of people just use their laptop, their built-in webcam on their laptop, even the built-in mic. A lot of the panelists I've worked with that have done that have just had some Bluetooth earbuds in, just so you can hear the other panelists clearly and not get that echo effect that sometimes happens that the software tries to compensate for, but doesn't always do a great job.
Yeah, like I just moved into a new apartment and I'm in the rear bedroom, which is a very large room with very high ceilings. So there's an echo here.
Yeah,
And you could try to use just the and a lot of internal laptop mics don't really they capture more of the echo than the voice. And the nice thing
sure.
about this is I don't have to raise my voice. I can just speak at a normal tone and you'll still hear me.
Sure. And that is something to uh, speak about as well. I've done a lot of microphone work over the years, starting with a university planetarium, doing star talks in the dark. And I've gotten comfortable with microphones. And one of the things I find with people who aren't comfortable with microphones is they make one of two typical mistakes. They either have the microphone shoved right up at their mouth and they're shouting into it, which creates a lot of issues, or it's too far away and they speak too softly. And what you really want is to have your mic positioned at the right distance and just to speak in a normal voice.
Hmm.
And then I think also I will say, and this goes back even to my filmmaking days in high school. Uh, yeah, I met my wife making Super 8 films back in high school. Uh, you want to enunciate clearly when you can. Don't slur your speech. Slow down if you need to, so that people can understand what you're saying. I know sometimes it's very exciting and you want to get out your words very quickly. I initially grew up on the East Coast and can crank up my voice to quite a fast speed when I need to, but also moved to the West when I was young and had to learn to slow down so that my grandmother and my teachers could understand me. And the same goes for panels. You want people to be able to understand you. Um, that being
And
said, if you have speech impediments or whatever, it's okay. Your fellow
yeah,
panelists just need to be respectful of that and make it work.
yeah. And in terms of in-person panels and just microphones, I
Yeah.
learned this because I did a lot of media work. Is you take your hand and you kind of do this. You want to be take your thumb here. If the tip of the microphone is at by this finger, that's a safe amount of distance. That way you're not you don't
Mhm.
have it close to your mouth, but you're also not trying to shout to get to it.
Yeah. And before the panel, test things out. In a virtual panel, we typically gather together in what we call a virtual green room in Zoom before
Mhm.
we start the live broadcast or before we start the recording. And we give a chance just within our group to kind of test, is your lighting okay? Is there something we can tweak on the microphone? Move it closer, move it further back. In an in-person panel, same thing. People are still kind of coming into the room. You can play with the mics a little bit, get them
Mhm.
positioned on the table right. You don't have to leave the mic where it was sitting. You can bring it closer to you if you need to.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that.
And it's also good to talk to your fellow panelists just to kind of see like how are they approaching the topic. Like with
Yeah,
Michael and I, it's easy because we both have the same amount of expertise. So it's mostly about, oh, okay, I'm going to talk about this. Oh, maybe you should talk about that. When you're dealing with four or five especially in a virtual panel, it's not a case of what's your expertise, but what basically the kind of what's your one sentence pitch.
yeah,
So for something like this, Michael's might be focus on the dynamics, the personal dynamics within the room. I might be all tech, like you need this, this, and this, so that um it's very easy to see this as because we're not in the same room, it'd be easy for me to see Michael as just a face on the screen. So it'd be like, oh, okay, well, Michael's quiet. I get to go in showtime, and it happens in in-person panels. Um, but by working out some of those dynamics, what you end up having is you have a stronger conversation because you kind of know you're not really stepping on people's toes, and you kind of know that the the really great stuff comes because of the conversation, not because you're focused on me and going, oh, wow, cool background, or oh, hey, Gordon knows a lot about this stuff. Let's focus on him. It's about the conversation.
sure, sure. Yeah, a couple more things about the technical aspects I wanted to address. Besides obviously lighting and positioning the mic, reducing the noise in your home during a recording can be a real plus. As you mentioned, you get some echo issues in your room. I actually am 4 feet from a window that faces an interstate highway. I actually have some foam rubber up in the window to provide a little sound buffering. I didn't do
Hmm.
anything fancy. I haven't like soundproofed this room like a home studio, but just throwing a little bit of foam up there has cut down some of the highway noise that we might be picking up. I'm also right over the garage. So I've asked my wife not to run the garage door up and down while we're doing this recording on December 1st. Um, I've, asked her, hey, just stay downstairs while I'm doing the recording, just so we don't hear you traipsing around the hallway. I even have one of those little hang tags for my door that shows when I have a recording in progress, just a reminder. So that's always handy. Oh, and there, I don't know if you can hear that, Gordon, but there's a car alarm going off outside my house.
I don't hear it.
And that's one of these
Um,
things. I've been able to tune my mic to reduce some of that background noise, and Zoom also has some features.
mhm. Yeah, like I have two, because we moved, I have two very whiny cats that don't like the
Yes.
fact that they're no longer in a cramped little one bedroom, but a nice big two bedroom. So they're, it's not too uncommon to have one of them start crying and mewling in a very loud voice as if to
Yeah.
say, "Hey, I'm upset. You got to do something about it now." So,
Yeah. And if you have a dog, same thing. You can start barking at the mailman or whatever. If you have a fenced in backyard, maybe it's a good time just to have the dog have a little run around outside time while you record your panel. That being said, another thing it's good to learn very quickly, and heck, if you've done a Zoom call or a Teams call for work, you've already learned this. Know where your mute button is. If your dog's barking and you're not speaking right now, just hit that mute button and deal with it. You can even turn your video off briefly if you need to, blow your nose, cough, whatever you need to do. I've done it in the middle of a panel, or I've just popped out for a second because I suddenly had to cough suddenly, and I didn't want that to be all over the panel.
yeah, and if you're concerned about like the room you're in for the background and you want privacy, download a background.
Yeah.
I, I think during COVID, the BBC actually created a page, and I think if you Google BBC Zoom backgrounds,
Yeah.
there's like stuff from like Dad's Army because we know the kids are into Dad's Army. We
Right.
know that it's bigger than Doctor Who. But no, you've got some like Quatermass sets, you've got TARDIS sets, you even have a couple of Blake Seven sets. But this way, it's because a lot of people um don't want people seeing like the mess behind me, or
Sure.
they don't necessarily want to see like, oh wait, she lives in, say, this area. So a
Mm-hmm.
background. Now, one caveat is that with it may not necessarily work if you have an older laptop because
Mm-hmm.
it's part of the processor, but
Yeah.
this can help. But Zoom also has a blur function, which works because that
Yeah.
way you're not necessarily um like if the only way you're going to look at me is to look at my background, that's the important thing. You shouldn't be
Yeah.
like, "Oh, wait, that's Gordon's bookshelf. What's he reading?"
Right. Right. Or like the big boxes of Lego I've got stacked behind me right now that you can't see. Uh, that other people have also figured out how to just clean their room in such a way that the messes are just outside the webcam's reach. And that's a thing too. But yeah, you're right. There's a blur feature built into Zoom. There's the background feature in Zoom. And neither one of us, I think, is using a green screen right now. This is just the software
Nope.
faking it. You can see because right around my headphone, there's a gap. You're actually seeing what's in the room there because the software isn't figuring that out. If I could have had a green screen back here and it would be taking care of it. They even make them that will attach to your chair. They just form a big circle behind your head. I thought about getting one of those for these broadcasts, but it's not even really needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And something on the technical aspect, and I've only found out about this through virtual professional networking sessions, is that there are tools if you're part of a virtual, you may be tempted to use there are several tools that use AI and others to take notes. That's turn that off because that can actually be disruptive to your session kind of go can it can be a little wonky in terms of affecting the overall conversation. It's there's nothing wrong with having a pad and paper if you need to jot notes.
I'll tell you, I've got paper right now with my notes for this panel, but a lot of times I've got them prepared in advance as a PDF. I've loaded them on my iPad, and I usually have the iPad sitting on the desk here just out of sight of the camera, but right in my eye line. And that works
Hmm.
great. When I was doing my science panel last year, my PowerPoint had most of what I needed to know, and it was on the screen because it was part of the broadcast. So I could kind of use that as a guide as I spoke. But I did have notes in my iPad again, just for some of the details I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to make. And again, that goes into the preparation of panels too. Again, if you are talking about a subject you know well, and that you don't need to have a lot of specific facts noted, you can wing it. I was a public school teacher for about a decade, and I learned how to wing it when I needed to. Sometimes one class would get 10 minutes ahead of everyone else, so you had to fill that time with something. Um,
Yeah, and the great thing too is sometimes when there's a lull in conversation, you'll have that moment where somebody says, "Oh, I know," and it's not the point that you intended to make, but it takes the conversation and moves it further along.
and this is one place where I think having had some preparation and taking some notes also comes in helpful. I've been on panels where it's just two of us. We're supposed to be speaking for an hour, and half an hour in, we're through the material we have prepared. Well, if we've jotted down some other ideas and notes, we have other things we could pull up and talk about. That's always helpful if you just got some conversation starters jotted down. If you come over prepared and you don't get to talk about everything, that's okay. That's okay. That's adaptability. Um, yeah. Um, Also, in terms of small panels versus large panels, with larger panels, it's helpful if one person is kind of fulfilling a moderator role. It doesn't have to be in a formal way, but if they can somehow just guide the conversation, either when you hit those lulls or when the conversation veers too far off topic, can kind of pull it back to the topic. Just having somebody that can jump in and do that. And like the Star Trek panel I'll be doing with four other people soon, I think most of us on that panel have been moderators at panels at console room or larger conventions before. So we all kind of have that skill.
Mhm. And it's okay if you're moderating. If there's one person who's starting to dominate, say, excuse me, um, don't mean to be rude, but I'd like to hear from, and
Yeah.
it's okay to like call on somebody else because
Yeah.
that way, again, there are some people who, if you put them in front of a room, they fall completely in love with the sound of their own voice, and they've
Sure.
never met a podium they didn't like.
Yeah. And there's
And
gentle ways you can do that too. Sometimes you can just say, hey, Diana, is there anything you wanted to contribute?
yeah, and that's the thing too, is if you see that one of your panelists is very reticent and shy,
Yeah.
it's okay to say, what, even if it's not going, even if it's going smoothly, just touch and base, say, so and so, what do you think about this? Because you want the panel to feel like they're getting something out of it, that it's, um, the worst panels that I've ever had, and actually ever run, was one where you had um, a guy who it was various podcasters, and they were local, and one person was so eager to prove his mettle as a podcaster that he kept inserting himself, and he was who-splaining all over the place, and it was just hard to kind of get the rhythm back. And it's, years later he said, "Oh, wasn't that a great panel?" And I had to bite my tongue because I wanted to be brutally honest and say, no, that was actually a pain because I was actually embarrassed.
Yeah.
Um, and if he's watching, um, you know what? Sorry, uh, sorry you had to find out this way, but yeah, yeah,
Um,
it was.
Similarly, I think the worst in-person panel experience I ever had was actually at a Lego convention. And it's weird because we think of the quirks we've seen in science fiction fandom, but in Lego fandom, there's a lot more money invested into the hobby.
Hmm.
Um, we were at this Lego convention, and it was a meetup of Lego train geeks with a couple of representatives from the company. And it was a double length panel. And they had just gone through a big change in the power system the year before, which upset a lot of fans. There were two specific people at the panel that dominated the conversation, spent a lot of time hurling insults at each other and at Lego with reps in the room. And the rest of us were just kind of sitting there shell shocked and embarrassed for them both. And again, this was a double panel with a break. We all left at the break. I don't think anybody came back after the break. That's telling. So,
And
yeah.
to put it positively, because we don't want to be
Oh,
all
yeah.
criticism. The great advantage and disadvantage of doing a virtual panel is that the internet never forgets.
Yes.
I mean, once this goes up on YouTube, um, and I think it goes without saying, whatever you're if you're doing it for a convention, know their code of conduct and
Yes.
respect it and act
Yes.
in accordance with that. Um, because it just makes things, it's very easy to forget again. We're all in front of cameras.
Yeah.
Michael and I are sitting in in two different cities, with different machinery. It's very easy to forget that he is a human being in front of a screen. It's a
Right.
lot, it's hard, it's sometimes easy to forget that. And so if he said something that upset me, it'd be very easy to start, you know, being inappropriate towards him, but it'd be
Or
easy
to
to
just
forget.
hit your leave button and leave the panel in disgust.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. That being said, at live in-person panels, sometimes you have that one problem audience member that tries to dominate this conversation or asks a really inappropriate question. And one advantage of the live panels, the virtual panels, is that generally if questions come in, if it's a live virtual panel, it's in a chat that is being moderated. It's just being typed into. You can just ignore the question, or you can approach it in a respectful way, but not let it take the panel in the wrong direction. And if it's a live panel, the question comes in, you can cut the person's microphone off if it comes to it.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and on the respectful note too, you don't only want to be respectful to your fellow panelists, you want to be respectful to your audience.
Hmm.
And given that Console Room is a family-friendly convention, and given that a live or pre-recorded virtual panel is going out on YouTube, let's keep the swearing to a minimum.
Hmm.
Late night panel in a panel room at the con where the kids are already in bed, fine. But when you're on virtually or when you're live during the day and kids may be in the room, just keep it under control as best you can.
Yeah, if it's a good rule of thumb is unless it's specifically 18 or over, because I think Chicago TARDIS will
Yeah,
occasionally have that.
yeah,
If you know it's 18 or over, yes, curse like a sailor. Other
yeah.
than that, keep
Yeah,
in
I,
mind
I
you're
was at a
jumping.
late night Torchwood panel at Chicago TARDIS years ago. All hands were off on that one. We could say what we wanted to there. But
Hmm.
when you're talking about the Sarah Jane adventures at 9:30 in the morning, expect some kids in the room.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Um, oh yeah, another thing, and this just again goes back to my teaching days, to my microphone work, to my filmmaking work in high school, is just enunciate clearly, pronounce your words. I think I talked about this before. Just slow down a little bit. Be mindful of how you're talking so that everyone can understand you.
Hmm.
One thing I guess one thing we haven't covered yet, Gordon, is how to become a panelist. And so, for most conventions, there is a brainstorming period at some point months before the convention for what panel topics might be created.
Right.
Sometimes there's a call out on social media. I know Console Room, I think, does this, where you can email in to the programming people your ideas. Sometimes they have an in-person brainstorming session you can attend. You can brainstorm collectively. But we gather a list of potential panels at that time. And, even if you're not ready to be a panelist yourself, maybe you've got a good idea for one someone else could speak to. So please contribute. Watch the Console Room website for that link.
Yeah, if and I would if you're looking to prepare to be a panelist, I would say look at the particular convention because I know Console Room and Chicago TARDIS both usually there's a call for panel topics and then there's the call for panelists where you volunteer and you're selected out.
Mhm.
Like panel conventions like C2E2 I know has a different approach, which is when you apply for a panel, you have to pre-select your panelists. So one thing I've been fortunate to know enough people who are Doctor Who fans who are um, some are, I do a mix of kind of like people who have more name recognition as well as people who are just, just plain fans. So if you're thinking you're just, well, I just like Doctor Who, well, you can be a panelist. I think part of it is understanding, earlier I talked about the person who's like, oh, put me on your panel. If you know someone who's assembling a panel, don't do that. Just, be polite and say, hey, look, I'm interested in being a panelist. If you, I'd, would you be willing, let me know if I can be of service? Because that way it's very easy to see a panel as your opportunity to shine. It's, you're an author, um you want to be noted, you want to be, and that's great. But it's also about, I keep coming back to the conversation. Every panel is about exploring a specific topic. Every panel, both in person and virtual, is about looking at a specific topic within a specific realm. Um, and so virtual, so it's easy to ask. I think if there's a call for, when Council Room does virtual panels, that's probably the best time to kind of get your leg up because
Mhm.
you're entering into, um, there are very few, most of the people I know through Council Room are great people, very low key, very welcoming. Um, it also helps that um, many of them are accommodating of schedule. So, we're pre-recording this before the actual convention. Um, so I can go ahead and just spoil that they're going to find 10th Planet Episode 4 in Antarctica. They're going to find the film cans. That's, sorry, audience, but it's about, it's a way to kind of ease yourself in. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's just, you know, sometimes volunteering for smaller conventions like Console Room can help you kind of get an in. I know that with,
Can certainly help you develop your confidence before volunteering to do something similar at a larger convention.
mhm,
Speaking to one of the small rooms at Console Room, you're not going to have more than 25 people in some of those rooms because they can't hold any more than that. But and many times you'll have six. But I've spoken at panels at convergence with 500 or more people in the room. So, yeah.
yeah, I mean the biggest panel experience I had, in about in 2006, I worked for an EPA funded project in St. Louis. And part of that was there's a mandatory conference that we all had to go to in Seattle. Um, and my boss at the time was supposed to lead a panel on, it was like mobilizing communities for air quality issues. My first night there, I slipped and sprained my ankle. So I spent most of the convention with an ace bandage around my ankle. My boss was, uh, keeping in mind that I can't use extreme profanity, um, had a tendency to be, he had better things to do. Let's just put it that way. Um, and he bailed. He did not show up. And they were asking for people to, um, run this panel. And I volunteered. It's like, okay, he's my boss. He didn't tell me to, but I figured, hey, he bailed. Somebody had to show up for the organization. And so I am at, and they had the moderator standing and the panel sitting. So I'm grasping the podium and I've got my right foot kind of up a bit because if I put it down, I was going to be in pain. And so for about an hour and a half, I led this panel. Luckily, the comments that came back, because well, two things happened. One is that people spent most of their time enjoying the Seattle nightlife and less attending the panel. And this was like towards the end of the convention, so many of them were hungover. They didn't really they weren't really paying attention. But the comments that came back were the moderator did a great job despite not knowing what he was talking about, because the person who was supposed to moderate didn't bother showing up. My boss was not happy about that, but he was later let go some months later. So yeah, but yeah, it's but if you're looking to get involved in a panel, consider virtual panels are easy because you're not, the risk is very small. And if you're thinking, well, I don't have the equipment, I don't have this, it's not even, none of us here have multi-million dollar, I just go to $20 Logitech headset.
Yeah.
Um, that's it.
Yeah. Well, and even with my fancy Yeti mic that I have here on the swing arm, I picked it up during a Black Friday sale for like $50.
Hmm.
The swing arm cost like 20 or so. So it's not that expensive a setup even to do something fancy. I have a
And
fancy Logitech webcam. Again, I got like half price on a Black Friday sale one year.
and if you're really, really that concerned, you can just find a closet in your home, lock the door, pretend you're recording a Big Finish audio. That
Was
sometimes
going to
will get you
say,
through
if
it.
you've listened to a Big Finish audio in the last few years, they've talked a lot about the duvet covers and towels and things in their cupboards at home where they made their little recording booth. There's ways you can drown the sound out and do good recording without it being fancy.
Hmm.
Absolutely. I do want to say too, console room, especially being a small convention, always needs panelists, always needs more voices. If you wonder why so many panels only are two people or three people, it's because more of you haven't stepped up.
Yeah,
So
and if
please, offer to do some.
yeah, especially since if you're looking and you're saying, okay, look, it's council room is mostly pale white guys over a certain age. If you're younger than a certain age and you determine what that age is, you're welcome. And you can do it anywhere in the country.
I mean, we're
And
in the
it sounds,
world for our virtual panels, really, as
yeah,
long as you can make
yeah.
the schedule work.
And, and the great thing is if you're looking for like a way to kind of build your public speaking skills or your Zoom skills or even like your presentation skills, it's very low hanging fruit
Yeah.
to use a business cliche.
Yeah. I will say during that point where you're bidding to be on a panel, because again, there's that phase of brainstorming panel suggestions. Then there's the phase of asking for panelists. You're looking through that list of brainstormed panels. Not every one of those ideas is going to happen. A lot of them will, but if nobody offers to be on a panel, that panel's not going to happen. That being said, certain panel topics are going to be very popular, and 15 people might be bidding to be on that panel about Ncuti Gatwa's first season of Doctor Who. You may not get on that one because there are so many people asking, but there's enough other ideas, enough other topics. You can find something. I usually will look through the list, kind of select, anywhere from 6 to 10 that interest me, and then kind of prioritize them from highest to lowest. And also, when letting Kelly, Marissa at programming know about your interest in being a panelist, you're not only giving them that list, but how many do you think you can handle finding time to fit into your schedule?
Hmm.
For virtual pre-records like this, I only offered about 3. We've got about a month to do it, but my work schedule doesn't line up well with other people's. And so I have to be respectful of that fact that I'm just not going to be able to fit them all in. Live at the convention, I'm ready to go. I don't mind if they plug me in a lot. Because I'm not there in person, that hasn't been happening as much the last couple of years. I don't care if other people are speaking. I would rather we had a diverse group of panelists, but if I need to do 8 in a weekend, I will, just to help the convention. That being said, more than 2 in a row, your brain gets a little burned out. You need some blood sugar. You needed some downtime for your brain to collect your thoughts. So I try to put that in my notes to them. Like, yeah, you can put me on 6 to 8 panels during the convention, 3 pre-recorded, but those 6 to 8, no more than 2 in a row, and then I need a break. You can outline things a little bit that way. Think about your own biological needs. If you're someone that has to take medication on a certain schedule and you can't be doing a panel just then, make sure they know not to give you a panel that time of day.
Hmm. Yeah.
People
Yeah.
are pretty
Take care of yourself.
accommodating. Yeah, people are pretty accommodating as long as you let them know what your needs are.
Hmm.
All right. Anything else we can think of in regards to panels?
Um, not that I can think of. When once this panel goes live on YouTube, yeah, I'll definitely follow up because if you have questions,
Oh,
ask
absolutely.
them, and I will. Yeah, I know Michael will, and I will.
Yeah.
So,
And I was going
and
to say,
also,
if it was a live virtual panel, we could respond to those questions as part of the recording.
mhm,
Since this was pre-recorded, put them in the chat. We can get back to you. Or
yes.
if you don't want to put them in the YouTube chat, come find us on Discord. I can certainly answer your questions there. The
Hmm.
console room Discord is very active during the convention, but there are portions of it that are available well after, and I'm definitely reachable there.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Don't hesitate to ask.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we are pretty well into our time. So let's kind of wrap this up. Gordon, is there anything you want to promote that you're working on right now?
Oh, sure. In fact, I have an essay in the latest Outside In Regenerates collection, which is pulled out by ATB Publishing, and it's essays about classic Doctor Who. Mine is about the first Doctor. Um, I'm not sure when this will be shown, but I know that there's a panel I'll be jumping into on January 13th at Console Room.
Oh,
So, um, if it's before the 13th, make a point of seeing it. If it's not, apologies. Had a great time. Wonderful people. You're all beautiful. Um, I also with the meetup with I also with Chicago Doctor Who meetup. You might want to keep an eye on us at on Facebook and meetup.com. Even though we're Chicago, we do both virtual and in-person events. And during the winter months, we stick to virtual because Chicago weather is kind
not
of
much.
comparable to Minneapolis weather. We take pride in our brutally cold winters. So,
Yeah, I
but
like
yeah,
to
please.
joke about the White Walkers migrating south past my house here in Minnesota.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So yeah, so that's what I've got going on.
great. Well, as far as virtual panels of the convention are going, I have two others. I don't know what order they're going to air in, but I'll be doing one about guest stars in Doctor Who with Rob Levy, and I have a wonderful group of panelists I'll be working with talking about the newer Star Trek shows. Lower decks, lower decks.
Yeah.
Also, just wanted for those of you in the Twin Cities to remind you that the Twin City Model Railroad Museum has been around like 90 years now,
Hmm.
still going strong. My Lego Club's been involved the last several years. We have train exhibits in that museum at nearly every scale. The museum has expanded in recent years at its location next to the old Amtrak station. And this time of year, if you come in the evenings on the weekend, we have night trains. We have the lights dimmed down and the train layouts lit up, and it's really pretty. And it's a great way to support the museum and keep it going for another 90 years.
Yeah, and in terms of other virtual panels, I'll be on the Seventh Doctor 101 panel, the classic TV that doesn't hold up panel. Spoiler, Doctor Who's not one of them. The Geek Health panel and the Lost and Found episodes panel. Oh, and the
Nice.
evolution of robots in Doctor Who. So
Nice.
you'll be seeing a lot more of me. And hopefully by this weekend is over, I haven't worn out my welcome.
And if you want to learn some science, go back and look at past console room videos. I've got one from last year about space telescopes, whole history, all the way up to James Webb, but all the way back to the beginning. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Hope that's given you some food for thought about being a virtual panelist. And if we can help you in any way to get there, just let us know. This has been Console Room 2024, Year 11, signing out.
See y'all later.